Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I'm here today to talk about my FJ Cruiser. It's what I've deemed the ultimate IFS FJ Cruiser. There's a lot of super cool FJs out there, super cool 4th Gen 4Runners and GXs and everything, and they're all similar setups. Can't forget Tacomas. I just wanted to talk about mine, how my setup is, what I've done to it, and kind of more in depth because I get these questions a lot. It'll be nice to send them to a video and they can get a better idea of what I'm running. I've tried to do this video a couple times and it just hasn't really worked out how I want. So I'm going to try to up the production quality a little bit here, and instead of just shooting on my phone and walking around. So I've made a pretty in-depth list, front to back, on everything that I've done. Unfortunately, I don't have, I wasn't YouTubing all of this as I was building the vehicle, so I can't refer to other videos. So it's going to be a lot of me talking in front of the vehicle like this and then showing you around the vehicle as I go. I'm going to cover everything front to back, drivetrain, suspension, armor, I'm not going to go completely over my tools and everything that I carry because there is a video on that. You'll be able to see that in previous videos. So this is just going to be a complete walk around on the vehicle, and let's get started here. So a quick synopsis on it: it's an 08 FJ Cruiser, long travel, Ford 9-inch in the back, ARBs, 488s, it's 3-linked, and there's a lot of work to get there, and there's a lot of other work that's done to it that you can't just see from the outside, because I am pretty adamant about not bolting everything to the top and sides and back of the vehicle that fits inside of it. So to meet CI, it's a pretty simple setup, but it works really, really well. This FJ's ran Pritchett Canyon unassisted, Moab Rim unassisted, Canes Creek without winching, the Trio without winching, Rusty Nail without winching. It's very, very well set up in my opinion. There is other things that people might not like and whatever. It's ran basically everything in Washington except for, I haven't been to Ryder yet, or Reader, however you want to say it. And then there's stuff like the Busy Wild that I just don't want to do because it's just a mud hole, and it's not really that hard. It just takes big tires and wheel speed to complete that trail. Probably get some shade for that, but let's get started on the walk around. I'm going to grab the camera, kind of show things as I go. I have a list of stuff to talk about, and let's get started. About front suspension stuff and front drivetrain stuff. So front drivetrain is factory front diff, which is a high pinion 8-inch in these, as long as other chassis similar to this. It's got an ARB in it and 48 gears. The CVs obviously have a 2-inch chromoly shaft, or 2-inch extended chromoly shaft in them, because it's long travel. The inner cup, and there's also a video on this that I did about CVs. The inner cup has 3 little ears in it where the tulip slides in and out. If you ever rebuilt one, you know what I'm talking about. I've actually machined those because the limiting factor for bind on these is actually the inner CV cup. It only has 25 degrees. So I machined those corners out, and it still has plenty of plunge for the tripod. And the outer CV joint actually has quite a bit of travel. It's 33 or 35 degrees. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. So I did that to help with bind, because I don't want to limit suspension travel. I'm very adamant that if you have the travel, you should use it, especially when you're dealing with such a little amount like we do on these trucks in the front end. And then these are modified Tundra tie rods. I made these. I took a Tundra tie rod, machined the inner joint down for where it threads into the rack from 32 to 22 millimeters, and then rethreaded it. And then I made an adapter, because Tundra tie rods are actually shorter than factory FJ1s, plus it's long travel. So I actually cut the tie rod down even more, thread it, thread the adapter on, and I'll get a closer shot of this as well. So I do that, and then I thread it on, and then I actually plug and TIG weld it around the outside of the tie rod, and then 2 plug welds as well, just to help with added strength. And so I don't have to worry about those loosening up or anything like that. Also, with doing that, I went from a 3/4 inch or 7/8 of an inch ball joint on the inner tie rod to an 1 3/4 ball joint on the inner tie rod. which gives it way more room to travel. So I don't run into steering bind like you do on a lot of setups as well. With this All Pro Gen 1 kit, it's an 1.25 inch upper uniball and an 1 inch lower uniball. That means when I take the shock out of this and go full bump to full droop on mechanical bind, it's 14 inches of travel. That's what I wanted to shoot for. So I'm a little under 14 inches of travel on a 2-inch kit, which is really, really good. Total Chaos 3.5 kits, you don't even get that. They limit off the upper uniball. With this kit and doing those two things, all the way on bump stop smashed and all the way down, it's like 13 3/4 inches of travel, call it 14. So I wish I had data to actually show you, because I know people question that all the time when I tell them that. But the reason Total Chaos limits on their 2-inch and 3-inch kit is because of that inner CV cup and the tie rod binding. So you can actually get more than that if you address those issues. RCVs also have more travel, so you can get away with it with those as well without modifying the CVs like I had to do on this. Like I mentioned, it's 2-inch All Pro kit, Tundra tie rods, and factory CVs are way stronger than people think they are. I ran long travel. I broke 2 OEM CVs, which you have to when you're long travel. One was before I was even long travel, and one was after I was long travel. I had over 1.5 years on the old CVs, and then they start to wear the inner cup out, or the outer joint out, when you start to add bigger tires and lockers and all that, and harder trails and stuff. So I wore one out, and I just decided to rebuild both sides and then build my spare at the same time. So I did that, and then these CVs have been in there since like February or something like that. And these went through Moab. They ran all of the trails I mentioned earlier without having any issues. So I'm still on the 2 CVs that I built back in February, and they're stronger than people led them to believe. All right, one of the other things that I had to do towards the front of the vehicle is tub the inner fenders to fit 38s. So as you can see, this is a factory inner fender here. This is the factory inner fender here. I removed this section of it and this section of it. Once I went to the 38s, 1350s are a little bit wider, so I actually rub a little bit right here. I just need to cut that out. That only happens when I'm touching the outer fender and full turn that way, and it just barely kisses it. So I need to address that. I will be doing that here in the future. I jumped it the other day, and when I do, it's Duro bumps, so they're not a hydro bump. So on spring bind, I just rub this inner fender and just rub the outer fender here with those tires. I was able to get away with just hammering the firewall back really far and an aggressive body mount chop because the All Pro Gen 1 kit moves the wheel well, or the upper and lower ball joint, forward 1 3/4 inches, at least what I compared to factory upper control arms. So it actually moves everything quite a bit further forward, and allows for better clearance that way. There's a lot of stuff that I had to change in the engine bay too, and we'll get to that in a minute. The engine bay is very dusty right now and a little bit dirty, so ignore that as much as you can. As you can see, my battery is moved over here. This is an Odyssey Group 31. I built a custom battery tray for it, made out of 1-inch square tube, and built a pretty big tray, fish plated it everywhere where it mounted to the inner fender well because it's a heavy battery, and I really wanted to, one, move the battery back, because on the other side, if you know these chassis, you know it mounts up really close in the engine bay and kind of mounts it out past the center line of the front suspension. So I wanted to move it back anyway because it is quite heavy. So I was able to move that back and then build my own battery tray for it. You can see right down in here, you can actually see the tub where it's cut, and I had to move everything in. You can see I don't have a washer fluid reservoir in here. That is actually what this Lucas oil bottle is. This is just a piece of exhaust. This is just something I'm testing. This is not permanent. I literally just put this in last week trying to cool the IATs down because the intake air temp is a little bit higher than I want to see. It seems to be working pretty good, so I'm actually going to order, this is 3.5 ID, this intake tube. I'm going to order a piece of 3.5 inch exhaust pipe with a 180 in it, so I can cut it off at a 90, run it out, and then it's actually going to run forward in the engine bay, and I'm going to get it ceramic coated to keep it from heat soaking, because metal does get hot and it does retain the heat. So I will do that to replace this, since this seems to be working. This is just 2 pieces of exhaust pipe I happen to have laying around. It's a 3.5 inch to a 2.5 inch, so it's a little bit restrictive, but it's not any more restrictive than all you guys running snorkels out there. So coming over to this side, you can see my wiring setup here. A couple things need to change regarding this, but it does seem to work pretty good. It's just a piece of ABS plastic mounted on top of my fuse box. I'll get a little bit closer of a shot here and talk about that more in a minute. This ARB line doesn't usually run here. Well, I say that this was a trail fix, and sometimes trail fixes just don't ever get actually fixed. I mounted my compressor down here. You can see the front and rear solenoids. I don't air up off this, but I keep the air chuck on it just in case my CO2 tank happens to go out. So the reason I moved the battery from this side to that side, and I wanted to retain some of the factory battery tray when I tubbed the fender wells, so I could mount this here, and it actually works like flawlessly. If we take a little closer look at the wiring here, you can see I just run your basic fuse block here with a cracked cover on it. The things I need to fix, I doubled up the wire on this side, 2 pieces of 10 gauge, but I have literally sitting in the engine bay this piece that I need to replace that with, and I have another piece of that wire to replace this section with right here. And then it goes to a fuse distribution block back here, and then individual relays. Each relay is waterproof. These 2 are for the front lights. One of these is for my transmission fan, and then the other one is for my rock lights. These are all 40 amp relays, so it's super overkill. This whole setup is for what I have, but it's very safe, and it works very well. This over here, you can also see the fender well is tubbed, and I had to move the fuse box in. I just make 2 more brackets for it on the bottom. I would like to make a bracket for it here so I can actually hang all the wires and everything on it as well. That's something that's going to be coming in the future. Now, what's hard to see down in here is this is my transmission fan. The biggest thing with running bigger tires, even when you're geared, is keeping the transmission cool. I monitor transmission temps with a scan gauge. This helps keep the transmission cool when I'm on the trail. When I'm running on the road, I don't really need to run the fan. But when I'm on the trail, if the transmission starts getting a little bit warm, I basically run it the whole time, and it actually helps keep the transmission like 20 or 30 degrees cooler. It keeps it more at like the 150 range instead of 180s, 200s. So that is huge when you're running a little bit bigger tire, or B, you're on the trail and on steep inclines and everything like that. So that's huge for that. As far as the engine and transmission goes, the engine is factory airbox is basically as factory as it gets. Transmission, same way. Alright, so let's start talking about armor a little bit here. So, on the front of the truck is a ResFab bumper. This is, I think it's a V2 3-hoop or whatever they call it. I really like this bumper. As you can see, I've definitely used it to push off of stuff. I even used the stinger in Moab to push Twan. I don't know how well you'll be able to see it. It'll focus. You can see I've used it there. I've actually dented this side of it. You can see that dent right. Sorry. You can actually see where I've dented it here, and then pushed off of stuff here, pushed off of stuff here with this hook, and then it's actually a little bit bent down there. But that's like full weight of the vehicle smash into a rock and then pushing up the front bumper. One of the things I like about the 3-hoop is it does help support this wing a little bit here. And then, I mean, those aren't even issues. Like, that's just, you know, using the bumper how it is built to be used. So I think it's all worth it in the long run, and I'm super happy with the product, and I recommend the bumper. Then we get down here a little lower, you can see the skid plates. those are technically RCI skid plates. You can see I have a little spacer on the skid plate over here. That's because I bent it so much. I have that one to clear so the diff doesn't rub on it. So if you look, I've definitely used these. I'll get underneath the vehicle and show it a little bit better. So I've actually bent these so much. In that corner there, I actually have it gusseted, and then I actually welded the engine and transmission skid plate together, braced them with an X in the middle, ran a runner down the outsides to make them a little bit stronger. It definitely made a significant difference as far as the overall strength of the skid plate. I think a 3/16 skid plate is just too thin without any gusseting on it, and I've talked to RCI about this, and they said that their skid plates aren't meant to be used how I use them. So take that into consideration as you go. Move along the side of the vehicle. Well, I guess since we're up here to talk about this, it's a Warren VR10S. I've had it for years, winched Twan out a bunch of times with it, and it works really good. Factor 55 thingy majigger that has a hole in it. That's a pain in the ass to get soft shackles through, and you have to have like 14 shackles to use it. So I recommend getting the one with the bigger cutout here. So more armor talk. Sliders. Basic trail gear DOM sliders. I honestly really like these. They don't have a kick up, or they don't angle up, and they don't have a kick out in the back. There's been probably 50-50 times where I wish they were angled up, and I wish they had a kick out. Most of the time, I'm glad I don't have a kick out, because anytime, if you wheel hard enough, you know that if you're stuck on the sliders, it's hard to maneuver. Sometimes you ride your sliders and stuff, but if you're super hung on your slider, the last thing I want to do is try to bump out more. I want to get to the tire faster on whatever obstacle or anything that I'm on. So I think not having a kick out in the back is beneficial. I do think I want to cut and angle them up a little bit, basically just to add more ground clearance to the slider. Alright, so since we're on quote-unquote armor talk, we'll talk a little about what I did with my rear bumper. The factory rear plastic bumper is super flexible, and like as you can see over here, I've torn it up really good. I've ripped it off a few times. You could definitely just pull it off now if I wanted to. I like I don't like a lot of the aftermarket bumpers and stuff that are made for these, and I think they're kind of pointless. I do have to have the bumper cut out, the plastic cut out. You can see it back there to fit the tire, but you don't see that unless the door's open. So what I did is I comp cut, quote unquote, the bumper. So I cut the bumper about halfway up, the rear steel support back here, basically the back of the frame rail and cross member. And as you can see, I've definitely drug it a whole bunch of times. I think that's the best way to do it on these. Jeff Greenwood makes an awesome rear bumper. I don't even know if he's selling them in production, to be honest, where he basically cuts the bumper damn near even with the back of the door up here, and so it gets rid of this overhang and makes the departure angle a little bit better. I never really get bumpered out on anything. I did a couple times in Utah, but it's nothing really to be too worried about. You can definitely see what I'm talking about there. So that's basically as far as it goes for armor. We'll jump underneath the truck. Actually, we'll start outside, work our way in, and start talking about rear suspension and the rear drivetrain of the truck. You can see the back of my rear axle. This is a Ford 9-inch. We'll talk about that more in a minute. You can see the pan hard bar. It's got a big fat gusset there, and then you can see the third link mount also has a big fat gusset, and the third link is also tied in to the top of the center section. And then I know people are going to ask, that water bottle up there is because I'm an idiot and I put my breather right over the top of the splines of the axle, so it actually throws gear oil and has enough to leak out the breather. So the next time I have the third member out, I'm going to put a baffle on it to stop doing that. I don't really like capping them off or using those slinky things because I think it builds too much pressure inside of the diff. But I know the diff doesn't get too hot because I've radared it, and on the drive down to Moab with the laser thermometer gauge, the hottest it ever got was like 170 or something like that. and we drove you know, 10 hours each day or so to get there. So it runs factory rear brakes, and I had to make my own brake brackets for the Ford 9-inch, but I want to be able to go to the Autoport store and get brakes and stuff like that, so I made sure I retained those. So now we're underneath the truck a little bit. These are my own custom links. They're 2-inch 250 wall DOM TIG welded bungs, left and right handed thread, enduro joints from Barnes 4-wheel drive. I really like these joints. They squeak a little bit more than I want, and you have to lubricate them quite often, so that's kind of a downside, but other than that, I really like them. They don't have a ton of angle or anything, but for any of the travel that you're going to see on these kinds of trucks, they're more than good enough, and they have almost a 5-inch long shank. So I purposely designed these links. I say designed like it was hard. I purposely designed these links to have, you know, like an inch of thread showing, so I didn't have to fight on either side getting wrenches in to tighten these up or anything. They're super easy, and then the shank goes in like another 4 inches, well, counting this nut, probably 3.5 inches in there, and that's way more than what you need. And then obviously this is 3-linked, so this, you can see where the old bracket was mounted on the frame for the lower link mount. So the lower link mount actually was here, and obviously I need to eventually grind all of this off. I was just in a very big hurry when I did this originally, so I never got to it, and it was just one of those things that I have yet to finish. So I really would like to take time to get that off. But so the factory link bolt used to be about right here where the tip of the finger is. Now it's all the way up here. These links are only 1 inch longer than the factory links are. But they act longer in a way because the old links on the axle side, if I can point the camera the right way, the old link on the axle side, so the link on the axle side mounted on these, if you know anything about them, mounts down and below the axle in a way. So I've actually, the link has moved forward almost 5 inches, if I remember right. It might even be a little bit longer than that. It might be closer to 6 inches. So the mount is moved forward, but the link's a similar length because of where it's mounted on the axle. You can see it's mounted on the front side of the axle versus the back side, or underneath it, which also helps increase ground clearance and all that, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So it makes the link act longer, and you can't just move these like this and keep your factory uppers. The geometry won't even be in the ballpark. As far as the 3-link goes, my 3rd link mounts here. It mounts a little bit behind the center point of this bolt for the lower link, and it's mounted to the frame. It's got a big monster gusset on it. I don't know how focused it is, but there's somewhere in here where I completely missed the weld, and it's a pain in the ass to get to and grind off. When I ran the factory numbers through the suspension calculator, there's going to be a lot of jargon here. The factory numbers for the suspension, or the 4-link calculator, were like 6 or 7 degrees of roll steer, positive roll steer. It was like 54% anti-squat, and it was like I can't remember all the other numbers off the top of my head, but anyway, when you lift these, the suspension geometry becomes trash. So I wanted to 3-link it. The goal wasn't necessarily to 3-link and get more travel out of it. The goal was to 3-link and get really good on-road characteristics and less rear steer out of the axle as the suspension travels. So now I moved the anti-squat up to just over 100%. I ran it on the Toyota axle when I 3-linked it at 86%. I ran it on this axle at like 74%, and I didn't want lower, so I ended up cutting the rear links off the axle, moving them down, and adding more anti-squat, so I'm upwards of 100% now, and it seems to work really well. That can be a whole nother episode talking about suspension geometry and all of that, and I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I know enough to be dangerous. So now it's like 0.5 5-6 degrees of roll steer or something like that, and it's 100% or like 102% anti-squat. The rear steer is very, very minimal. Pinion dive is very minimal. This upper link being shorter a little bit does cause the pinion to point at the transfer case on down travel, which is something I kind of wanted. On a front axle, obviously you wouldn't want to do that because it's going to mess with your caster and all of that, but on the rear axle you can definitely get away with it. So enough about the suspension geometry. You can see Dobson 677Vs that's what I use for a spring. One thing that you guys need to take into consideration, this is going to be a little bit long-winded, on the factory 4-link you can run as long of a shock as you want. The upper link is going to limit on the gas tank, and the lower link is going to actually hit the axle shaft on down travel. And when I measured everything with these shocks in the factory location with the 4-link on down travel, I was only showing about 10 inches of shock shaft. So you can't really get much more than that, and I had offset uppers and lower links on that setup. So you can't really get the full 12-inch travel out of these, and I wasn't aware of that at the time until I measured it and when I was looking into doing the 3-link stuff. So when I 3-linked with the shock in the factory location on full droop, both springs were actually loose in the buckets by like an inch almost. So when I built this 9-inch, I moved the axle, or I moved the shocks out as far as I could so they'd be really tucked into the wheel, and I actually moved them down an inch on the axle, and what that allowed me to do was to keep full tension on the spring. I think no spring tension at full droop means you don't have traction on that wheel, so you might as well not have that amount of travel, right? Sure, it could help, you know, having the wheel just touching the ground, but as soon as it starts to get traction, it's just going to move the wheel up because there's no weight on it, right? Besides the actual weight of the tire and the axle. So I think having spring tension, a good amount of spring tension at full droop is important. And now when I'm at full droop, you can't rattle the spring around it. It is very tight in there still, and I'm still able to go, which just in turn, moving the shock down just gives it a little bit more up travel and takes some of the down travel away. So I didn't lose any travel, I just kind of changed the ratio of the travel. As far as the axle goes, it's a factory 89 F-150 housing with a backbone truss on it, which you saw a little bit ago. Obviously it's 3-linked. That's the only Ford part of it, is the housing. The center, or on Toyota stuff, third member, on Ford stuff, they like to call it a dropout. So on the dropout, it's a Strain Engineering HD dropout, which is one of the beefiest dropouts you can get. It's a 3 1/4 inch bearing, 35 spline nitro chromoly axles, ARB locker, and then 48, or technically 46 gears. Close enough ratio, it doesn't matter. And then Toyota flange to tie all that together. Super strong. I actually added a load bolt to this, which you can't see very well, and it doesn't really explain much. Basically what the load bolt does is your ring gear rotates, the teeth are on this side of the gear, and when you shock load it, the gear actually goes like this and pushes away from the pinion gear. The load bolt goes on the back side where the factory fill plug would be, which I had to machine the dropout to take it. But so when it pushes away, I set it like 4th thou away, or actually Chris set it like 4th thou away. When you really, really load up the ring gear, if it's going to go too far, it'll actually contact the load bolt. And since it's spinning on that ground surface and the bolt's hardened, it doesn't cause a truck rack like a brake or anything. It just hits the load bolt and will stop that separation. Which is a similar setup to a lot of what Ultra 4 guys run, and a lot of Ultra 4 guys run a 9-inch style dropout. This dropout will actually take a 10-inch ring gear, just the factory housing won't, and I didn't think it was necessary for what I run. Also see the rough stuff pinion guard. It's a really good pinion guard, and it's super, super beefy, but I wish that the front was like cut off and it was angled up more. To get around that, you can angle the pinion up more, but then you kind of run into vibration if you're not running a double cardan shaft. But you can tell I've hit it a bunch of times, and if I wasn't running a strange dropout, and I wasn't running a Daytona, it's a Daytona pinion carrier, sorry, and then I'm using ARP bolts in it. I just wanted it to be as strong as I could, because I know if you hit it out here, you're talking like 5.5, 6 inches away from the mounting surface, and that's a lot of stress on that. So I wanted to make sure it could take the abuse, and I've definitely hit it hard enough where I've been concerned about it, how much load I'm putting on the front of that. But from what I've seen Ultra 4 guys and stuff do with similar housing setups, I'm not super concerned. On the bottom, right down here, you can see that's a 3/8 plate that I welded to the bottom of it, and I put a drain plug in there with a magnet in it, and then on top of the axle that you can't see is a big fill plug. You can see the airline running into it. Another interesting thing that I just did, and we'll see how it works, I'm still running a factory drive shaft. I flipped it around because this drive shaft's actually damaged right now, when it used to be facing down, the big end down. I got this off of a idea off some Ultra 4 trucks that I've seen. They run the slip yoke down because it's smaller diameter, and you're less likely to hit it, obviously being smaller diameter. The one big risk that you run is this is like a seal housing right here that seals the slip yoke. You can easily damage that, and you can easily damage the slip yoke, and then it might stop slipping and start to cause binding issues. Other than that, I don't see anything wrong with it. I've had it like this for a few weeks on the street, and I haven't had any issues. I do carry a spare factory drive shaft that has some damage on it, so if I ever do happen to damage this, I can flip it, but I usually just barely dent the factory drive shaft, so I know I'm just barely touching it. I try to avoid as much as I can, and the factory drive shaft is 3.5 inch diameter, and this diameter right here is 1 inch and 1/8, I believe. So it's quite a bit smaller. The other downside to this is you're putting all of this mass right in front of the pinion bearing. So instead of being stabilized by a bearing in the transfer case, which is bigger, you're putting all of this down at the pinion and putting more stress and vibration on that bearing. So you could possibly see some long-term effects from that, so just make sure the driveline's balanced if you do. You can see this is my transfer case skid plate. You can see like right here it's been dented pretty good. It's been dented pretty good over there. Ignore this wire hanging down. It's not hooked to anything. It's just zip tied up. I need to just actually chase it all the way back and cut it off. You can see my other skid plates here. The one piece that it is, I used to actually push a transmission skid plate almost up into the transmission pan, and that's why I decided to make them one piece. By doing so, it's not bent since I've done this. So it definitely was a help as far as all that goes. For exhaust, it's factory exhaust system, factory cats, everything like that, because the EPA's out to get us and everything. It's a Flowmaster 40 series, and then I dump it out right in front of the axle. It does drone pretty good, so I need to actually, I'm going to redo some of the exhaust system after the cats, because it's kind of crushed right here. So I think I'm just going to start back here a little bit further, and basically run to here, angle it up to back here, put the muffler up a little bit higher, and then run a pipe out the back of the truck, then drill a hole in the steel bumper and run the pipe out there. Just because this does drone a little bit and it kind of gets annoying sometimes, so I would just like to, quiet it down a little bit more. This Flowmaster does sound pretty good on here. A lot of camera stuff spread out in here because of filming, obviously. But we'll talk a little bit about the interior real quick. It's not anything super special. I have my phone mount here, iPad mount there, four-wheel drive shifter, regular shifter. I have this little fuse block, power distribution thing over here. I had my lockers up on the in front of the four-wheel drive shifter, but I actually moved them to back here. So I have the air compressor, rear locker, front locker, and I just keep this on it to keep from dropping shit and accidentally locking or turning the compressor on when I'm driving. So interior is pretty simple. And then I have like light switches. This is my fan switch, lights, rock lights over there, factory sub, switch, all of that. I keep a scan gauge in here to monitor all of those vitals, and that's basically it as far as the interior goes. In the back, I just did some detailing, and I don't usually keep a welding hood in here, but CO2 tank, that's what I run to air up. If I run out, I just use my compressor. The CO2, I swap those out. If Power Tank wants to hit me up, but I swap these tanks out, and it's literally 20 bucks to swap them out. So, and I get like 10 total fills off of it. So, you know, 40 sets of tires or however that math works out. I carry toe plates in here just in case I need to check the alignment. I don't keep them in here all the time. Shovel, drive line, spare steering rack, all behind the seat there. I have 2 tool rolls, impact, die grinder, that are usually in this box I'm about to lift up. And then in the box is just miscellaneous fluids, torque wrench, big crescent wrench, big wrench, extra CV axle, extra joints, some fishing stuff, spare rear wheel bearing, spare U-joints and shit in there, just big hammer in there, just the anything you might need on the trail. All of this stuff does go in those boxes. It's just out right now. And this, you can actually see the cutout for the bumper. That answers most of the questions that everyone was asking and looking for on this truck, or FJ or SUV or Lesmobile, whatever you want to call it. Tire-wise, I'm running Patagonias. This is my second set. I really like this tire. If you want to know more about it, just ask. 38-inch 1350 Patagonia on Method, 17-inch 105 bead locks. But a really good setup. I think that's all I have to cover. I'll go over the interior. I think that's it as far as it goes. If you have more questions and you want to see more stuff in depth, let me know. I'll be doing a thorough video on a Ford 9-inch. I'm actually going to be converting someone's FJ to run that. There is some downsides and stuff to it that we'll go over. I think that's the best option for the back of an FJ because it's light, it's super strong, and there's parts available for it everywhere. So I appreciate you guys sticking around and watching this video. I know this video was very long, but it took a long time to shoot,